You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Last month, Olympia became the first city in Washington and one of just a handful in the country to pass explicit protections for polyamorous families. That's a relationship with more than two consenting adults. The city passed two ordinances in late February that established protections for people in diverse family and relationship structures, which includes
single parent, multi-generational, blended, chosen, non-monogamous, and polyamory households. Homes that have existed since the concept of homes existed.
That's City Council member Robert Vanderpool from a meeting earlier this year. Supporters say the changes are aimed at protecting these community members against discrimination and unfair housing practices. Similar efforts are underway in multiple cities across the West Coast. More than 60% of people who responded to a 2025 survey on non-monogamy say they experienced discrimination or stigma in at least one domain, like healthcare or employment. Jessa Davis is the executive director for the Seattle Coalition for Family and Relationship Equity. She was involved in the effort to bring this change to the city of Olympia, and now she's eyeing the same in Seattle. Jessa, I know we talked a little bit before air here, but what are these protections that Olympia passed? What do the ordinances actually do?
So it establishes a baseline in civil rights protections for people. Just like for myself as a transgender woman and a queer person, we have laws at the city level and at the state level in Washington that allow people to live their lives authentically without fear of losing their job or encountering issues with housing or access to public services and public accommodations. So that definition of family and relationship structure that we create just adds a new category of person alongside these existing enforcement mechanisms. So you can't discriminate against someone, because you perceive of them as having multiple partners, or maybe their family looks a little bit differently than what you think some people might think the right type of family is, right? So it's just a baseline set of protections that allow people to participate in society without fear.
And what are some examples of those ways that discrimination manifests for somebody who is in a polyamorous relationship or in a non-traditional family structure? What do you hear from people that they face?
Yeah, it can be minor things like just little inconveniences in working with a state or a corporate bureaucracy or accessing public services where there's a presumption of just two parents or just two partners. Just like, years ago before marriage equality, marriage licenses used to say husband and wife, and we've changed that language. It's a small thing, but it changes how people can interact with their government. And that goes all the way up to larger things where either, someone acting in, a business capacity or as a, clerk at a government agency or representing people in various aspects of their lives might decide, this is icky, I don't like this lifestyle, and I don't want you talking about it. Maybe you shouldn't be around children at your job, for instance. So whether it's deciding what the appropriateness of someone's lifestyle is for a particular job, for a particular application to live in a certain home or apartment, or showing up to, say, make a 911 call, and then all of a sudden you have to explain what a polycule is. So we want to ensure that service providers, in the public space and in the business world more broadly understand that this is a thing that's protected and it's not weird, and these people's lives are just as legitimate as anyone else's to receive those basic services.
So like if somebody wants to be able to visit somebody in the hospital or go along in an ambulance, stuff like that.
Exactly. I had surgery last year and, they asked me like, who's your emergency contact? And I said, well, I have 3. And they said, well, there's only room for 1 name on the form. And I said, well, then I guess you need to get 3 forms. So that, again, is a minor procedural thing that can really have a big impact. I mean, if I was in a situation where I was in any kind of distress, needing to explain that or deal with the prejudices that I might run into can be really difficult and impact outcomes in a material way. And so that's one example, exactly. It's visitation at the hospital, parent-teacher meetings, all the way up to someone, either making you uncomfortable enough to leave your job or just outright firing you because of something you said in a conversation or a picture that was shared on social media.
So if somebody does believe that they experience discrimination and they live in Olympia, going forward, what would their recourse be?
So the recourse is civil, under the Olympia ordinance in particular. At CFRE, we have similar legislation for Seattle that matches all the different provisions within the Seattle Municipal Code for those protected categories of persons. So
and I should say CFRE is Seattle Coalition for Family and Relationship Equity. Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, we pronounce our acronym as CFRE because it's not exactly very phonetic to say otherwise. So thank you for calling that out. So at CFRE, we have a bill for Seattle, and that matches all the different areas within the municipal code, which includes more than just civil remedy. But for Olympia, it's if you feel you've been discriminated against in housing or employment, you can go to the city and file for relief. You can file a court case to say, I've been discriminated against, in the same way that if it was done against you for your gender identity or your sexuality or your race or your religion.
So CFRE, you got the Olympia law changed, and now you're turning and looking at what is going to happen in Seattle. Is CFRE nationwide? Like, are you working on stuff all over the country as well? And this is like the Seattle chapter, or how does the effort look everywhere else?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I got into this work on a personal level because my partner lost her job for being open at work. And at the time, people said, this can't be legal, right? Like there's got to be something you can do. And I already knew at that point that wasn't the case, that, relationship structure isn't a protected category under civil rights law. So I reached out to Open because I'm an activist. I'm involved in my community in a lot of different ways. And I thought maybe there's something going on here in Seattle that I could already support, right? And when I spoke with Open, which again is the Organization for Polyamory and Ethical Non-Monogamy, they said they're gearing up for work in the Pacific Northwest. So November 2024 was when we really started building up an infrastructure for this movement. And we partner with Open on the national level. CFRE has a lot of local volunteers. So we're not a chapter of Open, but we work closely with our national partners to provide resources to cities like Olympia. Tacoma is another one. I do meet with other people in our coalition nationally to help them learn from some of what we've been accomplishing here in the Pacific Northwest. But CFRE is an independent grassroots entity. We all live here in Seattle and the Puget Sound area.
There has, of course, been some pushback about your efforts, and it's not hard to, imagine the conservative arguments here. One that I've seen is that efforts to legitimize and protect polyamorous and non-traditional relationship structures or diverse relationship structures, that this will kind of Trojan horse the effort to promote polygamy in the United States. What do you make of that argument that CFRE and other organizations are trying to maybe promote polygamy or legitimize polygamy?
Yeah, and it's a great question. It's something that now that we've made the argument for why non-discrimination protections need to exist to certain, local governments, we're addressing this conversation, right? And there was a Supreme Court case in British Columbia in 2011 that distinguished between polyamory and polygamy. We've seen a lot of movement in Canada in the 2010s to have court cases decide things like allowing multiple parents to be added to birth certificates. And that's all, again, on the basis of polyamory being separate and different from polygamy, as one being a religious institution with certain cultural practices associated, and the other being just a type of relationship and the way people live their lives. Now, there's all sorts of values that you can dive into there, but ultimately, this is why we're starting with a non-discrimination ordinance, is to say that, polygamy is illegal, and polyamory is just allowing people, consenting adults, to live their lives as they see fit, as long as everyone involved in that relationship is also a consenting adult. So we need to engage with the conversation more. Not reading social media comment sections is self-care, but I do on occasion to try to understand people's perspectives. Some of it can be rhetoric just aimed at discrediting our movement and making people seem, morally suspect or default suspicious in some way. But, I've seen things like polyamory is just a Trojan horse for Sharia law or polygamy, and none of what we're working on now does any of that. And as we move forward as a movement to talk about like what something like plural domestic partnerships might look like, that's where the conversation gets a lot more complicated. And we really need to dive into that and have a long, discussion within this public sphere about like, what are the differences and how do we protect people from exploitation while also letting consenting adults live their lives without having to live in fear of losing their job or their house, etc.
Is plural marriage a long-term policy goal?
There are people in the community who want that. I personally am someone who never wants to get married in any type ever again. I say I'm a slow learner. I did it a couple of times. I found out it's not for me. I live in a communal house with 3 other trans women, and we have, some of my roommates have children. They co-parent. We exist as a family, and we exist as a family within a broader community with our friends and chosen family. For me, something that I'm looking forward to see if we're working on starting in the 2027 legislative session at the state level is expanding rights for people who don't want to get married or can't get married, such as people who are on disability benefits, and finding ways to expand dignity and the ability to live people's lives as they choose or as they see fit or as they have to, while contending with the fact that marriage still does have this sort of, priority and prestige that comes with a whole package of benefits, So whether you're intentionally single or not married in some way, we want to find ways for people to show up and to not be disadvantaged.
First off, I just want to highlight you are a trans woman, and as you say, you are in a living situation where your chosen family is, you've told us beforehand, it's non-romantic, but you consider yourselves a family. And so this is a diverse family structure for sure. And I'm just struck that you are, as a trans woman, also the target of a lot of new legal challenges to your rights in various states, challenges at the federal level, et cetera. And you are now taking on this fight for more diverse family structures and protections. I guess my question is, do you ever worry that by taking these efforts on, that you're going to open up like a new avenue in the culture war or bring attention that, has been so difficult and negative for the trans community to deal with and suffer through, to like the diverse family structure community? Like, is taking on this fight now, when the Trump administration is doing what it's doing, potentially welcoming, I guess, just like a huge onslaught of negative attention?
Yeah, I've had a lot of good conversations, about like what's the right approach and what's the best long-term strategy. Part of the reason that this matters to me is, I've experienced this kind of discrimination, with people in my life and against myself personally. And you're right. I mean, it's, right now is a scary time to be trans in the United States. I moved to Washington because I needed a place to be safe. But the thing that we've been finding in a lot of different advocacy spaces that I work in is, a lot of our infrastructure for civil rights is based on federal protections that are quickly eroding. So whether it's shoring up existing protections at state and local levels, like we've seen done last year and this year in the state legislative session, in Seattle City Council, in Olympia City Council, and elsewhere, we need these protections as a community. We have data from Open that shows, roughly 2/3 of people who've identified as non-monogamous in their surveys identify as some kind of queer flavor of queer. It's a broad spectrum, and whether you're asexual and aromantic or transgender, gay, lesbian, bisexual, the threat of being targeted is obviously increased, especially for trans people. And what we want to do is, without attracting any kind of negative attention that could further, disadvantage us, protecting a vulnerability that exists right now. Because if you have, a trans person at, a job and they're gainfully employed and someone wants to discriminate against them, chances are they might be polyamorous. And that's a great way to get rid of them if you want to do it without, getting lawyers involved. So for us, these non-discrimination protections are about stopping a gap that exists in the laws right now for people who might be marginalized through various intersectional identities. And that also includes people who don't experience any direct discrimination right now. They might have plenty of privilege where they can move through this world and not be seen as non-monogamous. I want them to be able to exist without fear too. So there is that risk of Trump tweeting about Seattle or Olympia and saying, look what they're doing in the Pacific Northwest. I think the risk of not acting is greater than the risk of doing the thing that we know will provide material safeguards for people in our community.
I want to ask one more sort of maybe in the weeds strategy question when it comes to these political efforts. Representing diverse family structures, that encompasses so many different forms of the way people live. And I'm curious if that wider umbrella effort is for you the most effective form of advocacy, or is there an argument to say a one step at a time approach, for example, focusing just on thruples or triads is a way to have it be a more gradual baby step approach? And then it would also inoculate you from this broadside about polygamy, that is definitely coming. Is this far too in the weeds for you in terms of strategy, or does that question resonate with you?
Yeah, these are all conversations that we have in from various angles of whether it's city council members saying this is why it's not a risk and these are what the benefits are. This is why we should be investing this energy right now into doing this. What I'll say is what we've accomplished in Olympia is enough for me to, in some situations, say hey, we've accomplished what we need to, right? There's a lot of different ways to do non-monogamy, and the reason why we've done this broader approach for every municipality we've engaged with so far is to say here's the baseline of anyone who has a non-nuclear family or any kind of non-monogamous relationship, or even an asexual or a romantic relationship, those people all are protected equally. And if a certain subset of those people want to advocate for group and plural marriage or plural domestic partnerships later on, we can have that as a separate policy discussion. Because not everyone within this broader coalition wants that. And it doesn't solve all their problems. And again, the reason we start with non-discrimination protections is because if we were to pass plural domestic partnerships, but you could still lose your job for being in one, it doesn't really help people make that step of accessing those benefits if that's what they want to do.
So Jessa, what I'm taking from what I just heard from you is yes, it is much more complicated to represent a coalition of diverse family structures, as trying to kind of work on the policy goals that would help that wide range of people and groups. But for you, you think that this is worth it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is complicated, and I think this is something that a innumerable set of camps can agree on, that we want to have these baseline protections. Some elements of our coalition do want plural domestic partnership or plural marriage. Others don't ever want to get married again, and they want to live in a different kind of family configuration. So those future policy debates can get more granular with the people who are involved in those. And within our community, there can be different perspectives too. This is a very bipartisan issue. One, I'll say only 18% of American households actually, approximate the nuclear traditional family. I use that word in quotes, traditional. If I could speak very stereotypically for a minute, you could say typically within the swinger lifestyle community, which is a part of non-monogamy, that you can find, certain very non-liberal people, shall we say. And then it will go to the more, stereotypically liberal sort of relationship anarchist, polycule sort of vibes. But you have everything in between, from people who are just opening up their marriage to people who've never been married and never intend to be in a monogamous relationship. This isn't a liberal culture war issue, and there's plenty of people who I know in the polyamorous community in Seattle who voted for Trump, for instance. So this is a broad issue, and we don't all agree on everything, but what we did in Olympia is something we all do agree on.
Final question for you. The sights are set on Seattle, an effort here to protect rights for diverse family structures and polyamorous relationships. What are the next steps? Like, how far along is this as a potential ordinance or set of ordinances in Seattle?
Yes. I mean, Seattle has a very complicated municipal code because we passed rights in housing and employment for queer people in the 70s, and Seattle was the 6th city in the U.S. in 1986 to pass protections for gender identity. So there's layers within the SMC that we had to work through with Harvard Law School and their LGBTQ advocacy clinic, with support from Open and a few other orgs at the national level, to craft a bill for Seattle. It's ready to go. It's ready for legal review. We've been having conversations with city council members and doing outreach to the mayor's office to find when's the right time to introduce this. I feel like we should just do it now and keep this momentum going. The fact that this bill has passed in Olympia has definitely changed the conversations to, oh, wow, this is a thing, and we're doing this, and this is a movement, and people care about this issue. So I expect we'll have some good news in Seattle and a few other large cities around the country that Open's working with. It's just the difference between Seattle and Olympia is it might be harder to get on the schedule sometimes. So it's a longer process of advocacy, but we've been having good conversations, and we're waiting for an official bill introduction, hopefully sometime soon.
Jessa Davis is the executive director for the Seattle Coalition for Family and Relationship Equity. Thank you very much, Jessa. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
And you're listening to Soundside. What did you think about the issue of cities taking on civil protections for polyamorous families or other relationship equality issues? Do you have any experience with this or something that you would like to share? Soundside at KUOW.org. Leave me a voicemail at 206-221-3213. Any feedback on this story, soundside at KUOW.org or 206-221-3213. Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.